Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Going Rogue, our weekly Star Wars podcast show on YouTube and on all the podcast networks that we have. I'm Andrew Dimalanta.
And I'm Nicki Dimalanta.
And we have a very special guest today. I've been waiting to get this guy on. I've been a fan of his for so long. He is someone that I look up to in the Star Wars community. Such a very positive voice. I've met him a couple times, and surprisingly enough, never talked to him about Star Wars. I have no idea why. But it is Joseph Scrimshaw from all over the internet, you know, from Force Center. Most of our audience will be familiar with you for the Schmodown, and we just had a very, very epic match not too long ago.
Yeah.
I mean, if for those who are keeping up with the tournament, everybody knows how it went down the other day, so... But we don't talk Schmodown here. We talk Star Wars.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us, Joseph. Again, we met in Chicago. Celebration a year ago.
A little over a year ago? I don't know.
Yeah, about a year ago. And it was because of the Schmodown. And again, I said we didn't talk Star Wars very much. It stuck to the crowd that we're in, and I was like, unfortunately, wow, I've heard this somebody because again, you're somebody I look up to, and like the weekly shows that you and Ken and go on weekly. It's like I always look up to these two for positivity in Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
So. I want to get started with your experience in Star Wars. How did you get into it? We always ask the people on the show, like, what's your journey in Star Wars? Where did it start? Yeah, what's your introduction? Because everybody's introduction is different. My wife's is very recent.
Yeah, compared to you guys.
Yeah,
very.
Yeah. So where's your Star Wars journey start?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of starts at the beginning for the most part, which, that's always, it's an interesting thing to talk about because, I live in Hollywood and I'm a writer and a performer, and the general wisdom in Hollywood is like, you don't need to talk about your age. You don't need to if you talk about Star Wars, you're pretty much just going to tell people what exact second you were born in order to talk about Star Wars, particularly where you started. So I was extremely young, but I don't have many memories of it, but I saw A New Hope in the theater. R2-D2 was there, and I was afraid Darth Vader was going to be there because there was a fake R2-D2 there. And I really came of age of my Star Wars fandom with all the Kenner action figures, Empire Strikes Back in particular. I grew up in Minnesota for the most part, but the summer of Empire Strikes Back 1980, I lived in Portland, Oregon, and everything was about those action figures and finding my Yoda that I still own. And I think that's really, my adventure was really being an original trilogy guy who was obsessed with the action figures. And then it went in and out of whether or not it was cool to talk about.
Yeah.
Took a very long time until it was actually cool, but then as I got older, I found other people who were kind of much more on the nerdy side, and then really it was only in the last 10 years that it was super popular.
Yeah.
And now just in the last, I would say, 5 years, and sort of mind-blowing to me that there's any sort of value in knowing a lot about Star Wars. I know we're not talking about Schmodown, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I found that experience with several people that I've talked to of because you've been around the property for it since its inception, and have you found, because I found because I've said it before on the show, I said it on other shows before, Star Wars is my oldest memory. It's always been there, it's always been present in my life, and I don't remember when I got introduced to it. I just remember it was always there, and I was one of those kids that I was the only kid in my class that liked Star Wars and growing up. And did you find something did you have that kind of experience, because you said you saw a shift from not being the most popular thing to be a fan of to now it's one of the most beloved things out there right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I have the memories are so young. It's the thing where I don't remember if it actually was in that order or my mind reconstructed it in that order. But I watched the reruns of the Batman 60s TV show, and that's some of my earliest memories is trying to draw a picture of Robin. And I watched the original Star Trek with my dad, and I'm sure I watched what other sci-fi show came on, a television movie. So my memory is that Star Wars was mind-blowing for the special effects. So I have that memory where it was this is a game changer that this even exists. And in particular, a big difference in my fandom that I really appreciate generationally is those 3 years between Empire and Return of the Jedi, being able to speculate changes my perception. It's why a sliver of a generation doesn't like Ewoks because I mean, even Ken who's just like a couple of years younger than me, is like, what's the problem with Ewoks? Because he saw Return of the Jedi first.
Yeah.
And just those 3 years make a big difference. So I get real obsessed with those generational differences of how we came in. Yeah, and it took a long time before I found a place where it was like cool to talk about it. Like in junior high, high school, I found some other people who liked it. And like I brought one guy who I wasn't even that close of friends with, found out that I liked it, and I had the VHS tapes. And like came to me and said, can you bring them to me at school? Like I wrapped them up in a brown paper bag like a drug deal because it was that uncool to be seen, you know? So it was so far from, even though it was a huge cultural thing, it was still like, I think there was probably a lot of secret Star Wars fans.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because
Even
being a
at the
nerd
time?
was crappy, you know?
Like while they were coming out, it was still like, oh man, what a nerd. Like even
I think-
during that time?
I mean, not when you were a kid, but like by the
Okay.
time, you know,
Yeah.
so we're talking about late 80s, early 90s when it had been gone for a little while, and the generation that grew up with it was growing up.
Yeah.
And Generation X ended up not, being the first generation that didn't put away our childhood toys, but instead made them our lives and our careers. But there was that in-between time where it's like, yeah, no, it's not cool to talk about Boba Fett anymore. Like, are you dating someone or do you have a car? Like, what are you talking about? Boba Fett's cool. Like, there was still that vibe,
That
and then the world
mentality.
changed, which is great.
Yeah, and we saw that shift. I think it had a lot to do with the same type of property that Disney owns. The MCU, I think, has a massive to do with that culture shift. Of like now it's not.
No, it's cool to be a
It's
nerd.
cool to be a nerd. It's cool. The nerd culture we're no longer the minority. We're the majority.
Yeah.
And just to be able to celebrate that is something that I find fantastic now. Because like again, I was the only one in my class that was like, well, you don't know what Yoda says in this movie? Like, I can remember, like you said, the VHS tapes that they had. Because like, I remember my first memory was Betamax. My parents had it on Betamax, and we lived in Washington State at the time. And snow days, I sat and watched the original trilogy, and I wore those tapes out. I can only imagine it's the same for you. Just like, oh well, I can remember there's a certain point in like I think it was Return of the Jedi where the audio would go because I would rewind it all the time. So just wearing those things out. But like that generational thing of how people come into Star Wars, like how do you tell somebody like coming into the property like with fresh eyes, never like they know of Star Wars because it's such a big piece of pop culture now. Like everybody might not have seen movies, but they know Darth Vader is Luke's father. And they know the big beats of Star Wars. Because when we first started dating, like it was like she's like, yeah, I know Star Wars, but I never really sat down and watched it. And
Never watched any of them.
Yeah, and now obviously
look at me now.
she's on a weekly podcast about Star Wars, but
I can talk coherently.
what
about
would
it.
when you meet somebody that's like, oh man, I know Star Wars, but I haven't like seen all of them. What do you say to somebody like that? Like you like trying to draw them in? Because I always try to bring people in. It's like you need to be in on this. There's so many things now. Like there's so many things that can speak to different people now with the branching out to like the Mandalorian and Clone Wars and Rebels, and it'll speak to so many different people. What do you like? Is there anything that you try to throw at people? Like try looking at this because
Yeah, I think it's just totally if they seem interested in diving deep, because I don't actually end up encountering a lot of people who are like, oh, I've dipped my toe into Star Wars. What more could I do? Like I have that conversation online and in the Star Wars community, but in person, usually when I encounter it, it's somebody with a strong, sometimes negative opinion, often negative opinion, who has watched the movies, and then for me and something doesn't make sense to them or they don't like that, and then for me it's always a battle to try to say, because I truly believe it, like, hey, if you just want to watch the movies and you have an opinion, everybody's a fan no matter how much you know or don't know, and that's great. But if you are curious and think the politics maybe don't work in The Force Awakens, would you like to read Bloodline by Claudia Gray? It's great. It gets into the politics. Like, I try to offer the, like, if you're interested in this, or even if you're troubled by this part of it, or if you never thought this character made sense, or that you thought they're great but underused, that's when I'll try to say, like, if you want to dive in, like there's this whole community of people who choose to go really deep and go all in, you know. But try to say that in a way that doesn't take their fandom away, because I do think you should absolutely be just like, yeah, no, I've seen the movies once and they're great. I love Star Wars. Here's my Darth Vader T-shirt, you know.
Every fan's a fan.
Yeah.
Do you have what's your favorite Star Wars book? What would you I feel like I've heard a couple names a lot. Like I feel like I've heard Bloodline a lot and
Queen's Shadow, yeah. Like I'll talk to about her like you need to like, because I listen to them on Audible. I don't necessarily read. I don't have a hard copy of them because I love listening to them on Audible because it's like listening to a movie. Yeah. And I keep telling her, I was like, you gotta look. Like I think Queen's Shadow will be perfect for you because it's a different. The Queen's Shadow changed my opinion on Padme because I was always like, Padme's not my favorite. She always seems like this character that is asking to talk in the middle of a fight. But then Queen's Shadow comes out. I'm like, I love Padme now. This is the Padme I wish we would have seen in the movies. So, but yeah, sorry, I don't mean to, to interrupt.
No. That's the power of those movies, and I will answer the question. But yeah, I mean, I think that what's so great about both Queen's Shadow and the new Queen's Peril is they take what's there in the movies and really explode it out. It's a great, it's the tip of the iceberg. And if you go back and watch the movies, you start to see Padme more, I think. One of my rewatches of Attack of the Clones is just like, Padme is right about everything, and no one is listening to her, and it's really powerful when you look at it that way and see like that was the intent. That she keeps going. Actually, like right away, she's like, I think it's Count Dooku who's trying to kill me. Daddy Mundy's like, nah,
he's cool.
You're nuts. She's right about everything.
Yeah.
I think the book that I like to recommend because it's not as popular in the Star Wars community is Rebel Rising, and that is basically it basically starts with Saw opening the door to get Jyn out of her hidey hole, and then goes right up to Rogue One.
Oh, okay.
It skips a little bit of time, so there's room for adventures that aren't defined. But it's so good, and it's one of those books that is definitely still in the fantasy world of Star Wars, but it takes like just a couple of those steps into like having respect for the real world levels of difficult life that she has. Like it doesn't back down from like, hey, your father's gone and he may or may not be a traitor, and your mom's dead, and your weird violent uncle is just training you to kill but nothing else. Have a good life. Like it doesn't back down from any of those stakes, but still feels like Star Wars. So I really like Rebel Rising.
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't heard of that one.
It's the story of Jyn. I didn't love it as much, but I do appreciate seeing like how she was raised and how like when you go into Rogue One, it's like, well, she likes to think her dad's dead, and it's like, well, this gives you the backstory about it because she thinks that she just left him, like because Galen says as much as like everything I do to protect you, and he tells her, tell me you understand this, and she's like what? She's like 6 years old. It's like, okay, yeah, I understand, but she doesn't fully understand. So that you get a backstory on that. But yeah, do you see any of Star Wars bleeding into your professional life? Because you've told several people before that you're a writer, you're a stand-up comedian. Do you see that like Star Wars ever like subconsciously influencing your writing or your jokes or your performances or anything like that? Because obviously in the Schmodown, it immediately influences your character on the show, and it's like. But like, do you see that influencing anything anywhere else in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in my professional life, there was when I was just starting out doing live comedy, it was more improv and comedy sketches. And for the most part, every once in a while you could get away with a Star Wars joke. But there's this real divide between the kind of comedy you could just do at a theater or a club. And then I started doing conventions early on. And that was this real divide of like, well, everybody will know Darth Maul's lines from the trailer for Phantom Menace, so we can do, a sketch based on his 2 lines, and everybody will be on board. And if you did those in the real world, people would just be like, "What are you talking about?" So,
get this man off stage.
Yeah, exactly. Or just like, why is his voice is silky smooth, but why is he talking about revenge? What's going on? So those worlds, a big part of it was just those worlds coming together in a really weird way that I never expected, because for a big part of my career, they kind of had to be separate, and then that changed with the culture. In terms of influencing anything else, I get really influenced in more so as time goes on, but just the fact that Lucas really is an auteur, in the classic sort of French definition, that what he made is extremely popular and changed pop culture, and you can argue about whether its effects on capitalism are good and bad, blah blah blah. But he also just made the movie he wanted to make under great resistance, and that's always just a reassuring narrative of, remember, all of this exists, these endless stories, because this guy really had a vision, and a lot of that vision was, hey, I like these kind of stories when I was a kid, and they don't make them anymore, and I want to make them, and everybody thinks I'm dumb. Yeah. And that's just inspiring, I think, even if you're not setting out to like make an epic that changes the world forever, like Star Wars. If you're just like, I really want to just tell this small story, or even this little comedy sketch or this TikTok video is really important to me. I think it's really inspiring to be able to look at somebody like Lucas and go, like, here's an example of somebody who stayed really true to their beliefs, and that really connected with people.
Yeah.
And so, kind of staying in the vein of stand-up and stuff, I was curious on what your take would be, because recently we were talking about humor in Star Wars, and I was like, "Oh, that would be good to talk to Joseph about."
Yeah, we originally wanted to get you on for humor in Star Wars, but like the time doesn't match up.
It just didn't work.
Didn't work.
We have you now, so so we were talking about some of our favorite usages of humor in the Star Wars universe, some of our maybe humorous moments that didn't land for us. And I'm just curious, what do you think about the humor in the original trilogy versus the sequels or the prequels, even the standalones?
Yeah, I think comedy is super generational in Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think all of them have, some to a higher degree or a lesser degree, all of them have kind of a silly, goofy vibe that is clearly George Lucas's sense of humor. And then I think also that it's there in some movies very intentionally, knowing that, hey, this is the first time young kids are being exposed to a movie like this that has a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And I think that when you look at a lot of the comedy, like particularly in The Phantom Menace, for years I railed against some of Jar Jar's comedy, but now now I enjoy it because I understand where it was coming from. That people talk about a lot of the influences in Lucas's work of it's a Western, it's a samurai movie, it's a Joseph Campbell myth. And I think one of the classic film styles that he's drawing on is just physical comedy, and kind of simple, straightforward slapstick can be understood by anyone from any culture, from any language. And I think that's important to him. So I think that's a part of it. I don't think he realized that all of the kids who had grown up with the original trilogy didn't realize that it's kind of goofy and silly when Chewie roars at the mouse droid and it, goes whoop and turns around. And instead we grew up going, what if Boba Fett and Darth Vader fight? Who'd be the best? I hope Darth Maul kills lots of, and then stepping and poopy. We just didn't, my generation didn't have any respect that for some people, this is the first time they're kind of seeing this kind of mix of comedy and how that adds to all the other ingredients in Star Wars.
And speaking back, looking back on the prequels and these differences between generations. I mean, Lucas has always said that it's the same story, but told for a different generation. Like the original trilogy spoke more to that generation. The prequel trilogy spoke to this generation, and then this newer trilogy speaks to the newer fans. Because you came in with the sequel trilogy for the most part. Your favorite character is Rey. Your favorite movie is The Force Awakens, and but how would you do you see that? Because I was one of those where I was a teenager when The Phantom Menace came out, and it's I was a teenager. It's oh man, lightsabers, awesome. But then I get older, and it's Jar Jar, and maybe the performances don't strike hit. And then further down the road comes and Force Awakens comes out. I look back on the prequels, okay, I might not like that part of it, but I understand the broader strokes of the storytelling and have a deeper appreciation. Do you see that with the sequel trilogy? Do you think that will happen later down the road when this new generation of fans grow up and become the older ages like we are, and look back on it and everybody will be okay, we didn't necessarily like how it panned out, but we understand what they were going for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think that it's the voice of the generation that grew up with them, right? So we're gonna have the voice of the kids who grew up with them, and like you who just that was your first encounter, so you didn't have all this baggage, right?
Yeah.
And I think the people who encountered it first, whether they're kids or adults, get to have a louder voice, and I think the anger fades away, and you just sort of, even right now, if somebody's like, I haven't watched Star Wars, and they just watch Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker without years in between, without listening to 1,000 podcasts, with 1,000 guesses, free of any of the baggage, I think that that is just a friendlier way to watch films. That's a more open-minded way to watch films. And so I think they grow in people's appreciation. And I mean, like that, I saw that happen with the original trilogy of the people that I could talk to were super mad at Return of the Jedi for a bunch of things. And that was just agreed upon. Like, of course, if you talk to somebody that the first half hour is awesome, but then the Ewoks come and it all falls apart and blah, blah, blah. And what idiot made a Star Wars movie where Han doesn't pilot the Millennium Falcon? They should be fired. They don't understand Star Wars. Like, so once you've lived through those and seen like, oh, those things fall away so much that you actually actively have to explain it to somebody, like, that's going to happen to the sequel trilogy. Maybe, I mean, there might be more kind of cultural memory because we're all online together of the vitriol. But I still think that there's definitely going to be some kid who just watches them, on streaming every day, and then eventually goes to school and like, what? People think The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker don't work together? What the hell are you talking about? Like, and it's going to be brand new information to them at some point.
I like that. I haven't thought about that. Not having all the conjecture like between all the movies, like, oh, because I came in on The Force Awakens, so I remember going and watching in celebration, watching the first trailer for The Last Jedi and seeing Luke be like, it's time for the Jedi to end, and everyone's just like peeing their pants and freaking out. It would be kind of nice to be able to watch them on your own and not have heard all of that stuff. But I never thought of it that way. I never realized that there was any controversy with the Return of the Jedi when it came out.
Yeah, there's a ton of controversy because
seems like history repeats itself even in Star Wars.
Because I remember listening to that one book, How Star Wars Conquered the Galaxy, or I can't remember the full title, but there's like a whole bunch of different things behind the scenes. It's like, Lucas has said, like, I had the whole thing planned out from the beginning. It's like, well, when you read the book, it's like, no, you kind of like, you turned here and there because you thought, this would shock them. People didn't agree with it. Then you had to turn this way because, and like that kind of, you can kind of see that with this sequel trilogy. I'm on record as saying, like, I really wish they would have had, all right, we're starting here, we're ending here, and not having to switch directors in between and like, all right, you get your story now, you get your story. What are your thoughts on that? Like, do you wish that they would have been more like a Marvel sense, like Kevin Feige, like saying, all right, we're starting here, we're ending here. You can have a little bit of twists and turns here, but this is the end goal? Or did you like that, all right, Johnson, you get your movie. Abrams, you get your movie. Or, okay, Trevorrow, you're gone. Oh, let's bring back Abrams. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep it short because I have so many thoughts. But I think that I think a part of the Star Wars process is this history. And, as much as I love him, Lucas does, in my opinion, say some different things. Because sometimes he says it's the deepest thing. It's entirely plotted out by every beat of Joseph Campbell. And sometimes he's like, relax, it's for kids. He does contradict himself. And it obviously changed along the way. There's obvious things in the original trilogy. I don't think he said, I think the perfect setup for Luke and Leia being siblings is multiple instances of kissing. Like, it's obviously not entirely planned. And even with the prequel trilogy, even though I think he had it much more mapped out, he's on record himself of he made all these left turns for Revenge of the Sith because he realized, oh, I wanted to finish telling Boba Fett's story. I wanted to explain Qui-Gon's path to immortality, but I realized, hey, I forgot to tell the Clone Wars. Not even forgot. That's a little harsh, but you know what I mean. He had to focus on ending the war and telling Anakin's story, and it forced him to compress a bunch of stuff. So even in the prequels. So for me, it's just like, it's a part of Star Wars. It's one of the things that I appreciate about Star Wars is that it does have this sense of play and adventure and discovery that, to me, in a sort of meta way, works with the philosophy of the Jedi, like that you should be clear in your convictions, but you should always also be willing to question yourself. You shouldn't be overly rigid. There should be some amount of flow and reacting to the moment. So I'm not bothered. I wouldn't have minded if it was 3 directors, and I'm not that bothered by it. And I also just think in the big picture, the story wouldn't change that much. I think little details would realign to agree better. but I for me, like thematically, it little things to me of like, yeah, we kind of like we're gonna go towards a romance with Rose and Finn, and you know, and that's just like little things, you know, for me.
Yeah. Do you have any? You had one question that you really wanted to ask about.
Oh, well, I mean, we kind of moved away from it a bit. I was gonna ask about with your wife, like, I was gonna ask, does she share in your love of Star Wars with you, or is she kind of like, oh, cool story, Joseph?
No, she absolutely does. It's been really, really great. Yeah, I've been talking with her recently. We started dating in 2005, and we can't remember if the first movie we saw together was Revenge of the Sith or the documentary March of the Penguins. We saw them like a week apart, I think.
Oh, that's awesome.
And she was very much like, she grew up with Star Wars in the way that it was omnipresent in the 80s, and her brother was, you know, a big fan, and we have like a really adorable picture of her brother giving her the original Leia Kenner action figure for Christmas, and you know, her just kind of squealing in delight as a little kid. And, so she was definitely somebody who was like, yeah, I'm aware of it. I've seen them all. I like it. And then when we got together and she found out it really meant a lot to me, then, you know, she was more interested and watched everything and discussed everything. But it was Force Awakens that really hooked her. And that into like, no, I support your fandom, but now, you know, I have my own fandom and I have my own things that I'm really interested in. And she only has so much time to read, but she will ask me and like really pick and choose. So she's read Bloodline because, you know, based on the description, that was real important to her. And same thing with Rebel Rising because she really liked Jen. So yeah, she doesn't, I think, have time or proclivity to be as deep as some of us, but she's a big fan.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, the support of, you know, your significant other actually helps. And just to bring in the schmodown a little bit, does she help with the studying at all? Because Nicki has gone above and beyond, and I think her helping me prepare for the schmodown has making her an even more appreciative fan. Do you see that with your wife at all, or does she sort of like, all right, here, I have some questions for you, here you go? What is that experience like with you guys?
Yeah, the first few times that I did it, she didn't help much, just my process was I just started a notebook and I started writing answers down, and I didn't have the forethought to write them down in the form of a question so she could flip through the book and ask me. So it was just like, she can't just flip to something that says G287. What how do I turn that into a question, kind of thing? And then as it went on and the studying got more intense, you know, I talked to her about like everybody else is kind of in the way I perceived it is in worlds or relationships where they can give this more time than I have. And she's like, oh, well, let me see if I can try to help. So we watched a couple of the movies together, and she would jot down notes as we watched the movies. And she really got into that the last time, that the last pass of studying. And in fact, when I was telling her about one of the matches and one of the difficult questions that somebody missed, she had this great moment of pride because she's like, when we were watching the movie, I wrote down that question.
Yes, that's the best feeling. Like, that's in my notes. Good to know that there's more like me.
Yeah.
Does it change her perception or your perception of the movies? Because I find like the further we've delved deep into these movies, and I found a deeper appreciation for like Rogue One, for instance. Like I first time I saw Rogue One, it's like, all right, I have problems with the characters. The first two acts don't speak to me as much as the third act does. But then I kept watching it and watch it. Obviously, you know how many times you have to watch these movies for the schmodown. I was like, wow, I'm really appreciating these small little beats that I completely glossed over the first couple times I watched it. Do you find yourself
like, I never noticed.
Yeah,
that.
do you find yourself seeing things like that when you revisit these films now?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. When I watch the movies in the past, especially the original trilogy, sometimes when I'm watching them just for fun, that's a game I like to play of, can I notice something, just something like weird in the background? I think the way it's been making me appreciate them more is to go down little weird side quests, because as you not to turn into a schmodown competition, but conversation.
Yeah.
But the way the game has evolved, it is anything that appears on screen once is fair game, regardless of that name. Maybe it's not even in modern canon, and how deep do you have to go? Yeah.
Happened to me yesterday. So yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So I've been trying to enjoy that when I watch the pause and track that down, because a lot of times it's not like, oh, I'll just look in the credits for that. It's track it down, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not actually readily accessible information. It's a hard thing to Google sometimes. But I've gotten some enjoyment out of like going a little deeper and just some like connections I miss. I'm not as big on the ships and technical stuff. So when I find like a connection in the ships or the weapons that make them more resonant to me, then that's like a really nice discovery. Like I hadn't known, I think I knew at some point, but I had long forgotten because I hadn't had a reason to know it, that Grievous's ship was named the Soulless One. So like that was like a fun detail that like, ooh, that has like flavor and character to me. And that's the way I get, more joy out of it that way.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think we'll hit a couple of Patreon questions. Our squadron captains, the $10 and above, get to dictate the conversation on our weekly shows. So we have a couple questions from our squadron captains.
Yes. I have two here. One is from Ferris Muthana. Awesome. Love you. Hey, Joseph. Longtime fan. My question is about lightsabers. What's your favorite lightsaber design? And would you like to see more designs of the saber? P.S. Drew, I love you, man.
Thank you, Ferris.
Precious.
Yeah. Oh, man, favorites are hard because it comes up so much in Star Wars conversation, and I'm just like, well, let me unroll this list. Here's 17 favorites because I don't want to pick one. But I think just kind of basic design-wise, I think because I really gravitate to Obi Wan, I really like the Obi Wan saber design, and Luke's green saber with the sort of saucer top is probably like my favorite design. I really like the fascinating game at this point in Star Wars of lightsaber evolution and different designs is part of it, but how far can you go before it's weird?
Yeah.
And like when the Force Awakens trailer came out, like before I understood sort of how much it matched his character, the Kylo Ren was like, all right, come on, do we need to do this? Do we need to do the little? But now I love it to death, and it's one of my favorite designs. So the Inquisitor's spinny blades are maybe not my favorite, but because
I gotta look that up.
Because like they kind of spin them and like they fly like it's like a helicopter. It's like
what?
I don't understand. I don't understand how that works. No, because like it's like a this little disc that spins around it, and like
I'm gonna have to Google that later.
It's a little far fetched for my taste. It's like they're actually flying like helicopters. What's going on? But it makes for some interesting lightsaber fights. When was the last time you actually saw like a weapon in Star Wars where we were like, that's cool. Like I need that now, or any kind of like weapon or ship or like piece of helmet. Because like when I saw the Mandalorian helmet, like I have it sitting right here off here. It's like this little prop that I have to finish. But like I need that helmet, so I went and bought like a kit for it. I gotta like finish it up and stuff. That's a side project for another time. But is there anything like that you see in any kind of Star Wars like show or movie that like I need that now?
Yeah. I think Rogue One knocked it out of the park with design. I love the Shore Trooper. I love the TIE Striker, which I know, of course, you know what it is. You know what everything is. But, for people who are not Googling or studying for championships, it's much more bat-like TIE Fighter with the solar panels on top. Very cool. So a lot of stuff from Rogue One has really grabbed me. But Rey's lightsaber, to me, just like I absolutely love everything about the end of Rise of Skywalker. I recognize other people don't, and I respect that opinion. But for me, I absolutely love it. The power of I learned from these people. I learned from Luke and Leia. They're like my parents. They will always be with me. But one of the things they taught me is to move on. So I'm going to take this part of myself, my staff, and I'm going to build it into something truly new. So I do have the past with me, but I'm not living in it. I'm moving forward. That is all there in her blade. And then it also just looks like damn cool. Like, clicky wheel spin, and the yellow. And, it's just cool for cool sake. And then on top of it, when it has all these thematic things that really resonate with me, I can't wait until there's more merch of Rey's blade.
Excellent.
I love that.
Yeah. So we went off on tangent a little bit from the question, but
Hey man, that's what
we have
we
another
do.
one from another squadron commander or
Josh
captain.
Estes,
Sorry,
love you too,
John,
bro.
yes, sorry, Josh Estes.
Josh Estes.
Yes.
Joseph. Well, we kind of might have already talked about this
yeah.
a little bit, but here we go. Joseph, where did your love of Star Wars come from, and who is your favorite Jedi? Love you all. Keep up the great work on both shows.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
So we kind of already talked a little bit about where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I
but
wanna
favorite
make-
Jedi.
So,
I think favorite Jedi is definitely Obi Wan. It's and again favorite with a caveat because I don't really like doing favorites.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love how complex the character is. I love the arc that I got to go through with him of like he's the old man, he's the mentor, and then getting to see him as a young man and really like see he was the character I identified with when I saw the prequels, and just all the ways that character has developed. I think he's one of the most nuanced characters in Star Wars because he has all these contradictions and that people love to discuss whether like is he just a lying jerk or can you understand why he wouldn't dump all of that on Luke and why does he care about the things he cares about and just everything about him. Charming, wise, a little grumpy, a little short.
Yeah.
He's very relatable.
Yeah, might have a little bit of a drinking problem.
Yep. Very, very relatable.
Yes. Who does that ever?
So yeah, but sticking on Obi-Wan, like, are you excited? Are you worried that it's being pushed back a little bit? What are the anticipations for the new Obi-Wan series? Like, how soon do you want to see it come out? Are you happy that they're taking their time with it? Is it a blessing that that COVID sort of pushed it back and then they get to spend more time on it? What are your thoughts on like Obi-Wan and like what's your anticipation for? And what do you expect to see?
Yeah, I'm super, super excited for it. I think it is one of those things. If I love the character, and I do have, I have hopes and dreams, and it's a good Jedi trial to not turn those into expectations where I sit down and expect to see exactly what I want to see. Like I want to see it, but if it doesn't happen, I want to open myself up to what are the other ideas. For me, the big idea in Obi-Wan's arc is that. I think that he couldn't bring himself to finish Anakin. I think that he saw him limbless and burning and thought, good enough. But at the same time, that there's this moment where he turns around and he knows he should just end him, and he can't bring himself to do it. When we meet him again in Return of the Jedi, I think there is, the whole original trilogy, but the speech is in Return of the Jedi. There's a sadness to it, but I think he is telling Luke the truth from his perspective, totally honest, that Anakin is gone. There is nothing there. It's really sad, but for the galaxy to have any hope, you do just have to kill him. For me, that story is complete in there was a time where Obi-Wan's sitting on Tatooine, beating himself up and says, I have to try. It's the last thing that Padme said to me, that there's still good in him. I have to try. So I would love it if the story is he tries to get through to Anakin in a bittersweet moment of he almost gets there, but he just gets shut down, and then you understand why he believes what he believes. And for me, it's like we don't get to spend any time in it in the film, really, but tracing the themes and the ideas, which were certainly in the film, Luke's victory is attachment. Yoda and Obi-Wan are still kind of holding on to like attachment's a gift, but it's a risk. I mean, Obi-Wan even says like your attachment to Leia is a credit, but bury it. It does your credit, but bury it deep down. Yeah. And the fact that Luke wins and brings Anakin back, I think Obi-Wan must be so happy to be wrong that his friend, his brother, Anakin wasn't gone, and he was wrong that violence wasn't the only answer. Luke found another way and brought his friend back. It's got to be just like such a joyful moment for Obi-Wan.
This is probably going to be a dumb question, but here it comes. Can Force ghosts talk to each other?
I think so.
I think so, yeah, because I remember in the novelization of the Rise of Skywalker, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the spirits of Obi-Wan come back to, I think, Leia. I think it is, because I remember because Rey's having a hard time connecting to Jedi of the past, but Obi-Wan comes back to talk to Leia. Luke throughout the book comes back and talks to Leia like, "Hey, it's time. We gotta go. Stop dilly-dallying. We gotta go." And so I think also in another book, I think it's a certain point of view that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon talk to each other. I might be wrong in some place, but I think it's certainly possible. I mean,
there's some there's great Force Ghost stuff in a certain point of view. There's the story where Obi-Wan Qui-Gon comes to Obi-Wan while Luke is going back to the farmstead to check on what turns out to be the bones of his aunt and uncle. And then there's another great story, Kevin Scott, of Obi-Wan's moment of dying and him kind of entering into the Force.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And that's great because I really like that canon. That's really, we see the Force Ghosts on screen, and it's somebody's come back from the netherworld, but that really gets into like, remember, they're moving on to another level of existence where everything that could ever possibly be, everything that has been and everything that may or may not be in the future is all happening at once, and they have an entirely different understanding of reality. And when they appear as Force Ghosts and kind of help us out, it's from this very specific point of view of like, oh, okay, I'll go back to that version of reality, but that's not really the reality the way I now perceive it.
I think one of my most favorite,
wow.
That's why he's the best.
Wow. I am blown away.
I think one of my most favorite like Force Ghost like storylines was when the Ghost of Obi Wan, he had just become one with the Force, and he goes visits Yoda on Dagobah, and he's like, "I have somebody I want you to train," and it's like, "No, I've been watching him. He's not the one I want. I want his sister, because she's the one. Because it always like a certain point of view that the chosen one always comes up. It's like, who do we think the chosen one is? We once thought it was Anakin. Obi-Wan thought it was Luke. Yoda thought it was Leia. Luke thought it was Ben. So it's like these certain point of view, and that was one of my most favorite Ghost moments. Was like Yoda's like, no, I don't want to train Luke. I want Leia's clearly the stronger one, but then Obi's like, no, this is the guy. We got to train Luke. He's our last hope. So, that book was fantastic with different storylines. I always love seeing the broad strokes of Star Wars seen from different angles, and I think that's why Lost Stars is kind of one of my favorite books, because it's the original trilogy but told from two regular people in the galaxy, and they see things differently. But I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap the show up today. Thank you so much, Joseph, for joining us. Hopefully we can meet again in person, and we can do this for hours and hours and hours over a couple of beers and a celebration. I would love to do that. But for those who don't know already, where can they find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Joseph Scrimshaw. And then, of course, you can find Force Center, the podcast I do with Ken Knapsack, and Jennifer Landa will return eventually. You can find that anywhere that podcasts are available. Not sold, available.
Nicki Dimalanta, where can they find you online?
Mainly Twitter, and I'm Dimmy at DIMMMYYY.
As for me, at Drew Dimalanta, DIMALANTA. Also on Twitch, now that the Star Wars tournament is over, I can get back to doing some Twitch streams finally.
Can relax a
little bit. Don't have to watch Star Wars every single minute of every single day. But thank you for those who are joining us on YouTube. If you are watching us on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us on audio feed, the Beyond the Schmodown podcast feed, that's where you can find this show. Please rate us. Helps us out tremendously. And if you feel so inclined, join our Patreon, patreon.com/Andrew and Nikki. Lost my train of thought, but so thank you to our squadron captains for submitting their questions today. Tamor Bada, Ferris Mathana, and Josh Estes. Estes. I don't
know if it's Estes or Estes.
I always mispronounce his name. Estes.
But we'll hit both bases.
Thank you. But if you feel so inclined to join that, we are calling our patrons the Squadron. So join the Squadron today. When we reach 50 patrons, we're going to start another podcast, general discussion podcast. Everybody loves us just going off on tangents and talking about nothing. But thank you so much, Joseph, for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to Star Wars for you, the brief little time that we had you. But thank you for joining us today.
This was great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody else, for joining us today on this episode of Going Rogue. May the Force be with you always.